Week 15 of the fantasy football season. With playoffs starting this week, here's a few wide receivers that possibly could help fantasy owners. Off the wire this week, the first receiver, Jalen McMillan of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So McMillan, all season long, we waited for a big game from him, and especially when Mike Evans was out of the lineup and not just Chris Godwin, we thought he could go out there and put up numbers, but that obviously hasn't been the case. But he finally had a breakout game in Week 14 versus the Vegas Raiders as McMillan. Week 12 at the Giants to catch 11 yards. Week 13 at the Panthers, 2 for 25. And Week 14 versus the Raiders, like I said, the breakout game, 4 catches, 59 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So Week 15, a middle-of-the-pack matchup with the Chargers. Their pass defense gives up the 19th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the year. And we know Baker Mayfield, he needs that third option in the passing game. We know he's got Mike Evans, Cade Otton as the top 2 targets, and Rashad White, a good flanking back, catch the football out of the backfield. But I think McMillan, if he could step up and start putting up some numbers, it could be a huge boost for this Buck team and even fantasy owners that need receivers at this part of the season with injuries, even though the playoffs are starting, and he's available in 95% of fantasy leagues. Next wide receiver Quentin Johnson of the Los Angeles Chargers. So it's been an up and down second season for Quentin Johnson, and now Ladd McConkey, he missed the ball game on Sunday Night Football, the Kansas City Chiefs, and Quentin Johnson was operating as the number 1 wide receiver, and he had a nice ball game, 5 catches, 48 yards, and a touchdown. But the thing with Johnson, he's just been very inconsistent this season on some big games he's had, and then games where he only gets 3-4 fantasy points as Johnson. So Week 15, a good matchup versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Give up the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season, and we'll see if Ladd McConkey could get healthy in time and come back after he missed that Sunday night ball game, like I said, at Kansas City. But either way, Quentin Johnson, he'll still be operating as a starting wide receiver for this Los Angeles Charger team. And if he just could minimize some of the drop passes, I think he really could help and have good fantasy value. When you play with a talent like Justin Herbert, your numbers are going to be better than playing with a mediocre quarterback. So I think Johnson, if he fixes the drop problems, I think he could be a decent wide receiver because he's got good route running. He's made some nice plays this season, but just has to be more consistent. But definitely someone I would add off the wire this week, and he's available right now in 60% of fantasy leagues. Next wide receiver, Marquez Valdez-Scantling of the New Orleans Saints. No, Derek Carr is going to miss time now with a fractured hand, it looks like, for Derek Carr after he tried hurdling a defender, and he just fell face first and on the hand as well. So MVS has been a good signing for the Saint team, and someone still has to go catch the football out there. And he's had 9 or more fantasy points in the last month of the season. Week 10 versus Atlanta, 3 catches, 109 yards, 2 touchdowns. Week 11 versus Cleveland, 2 catches, 87 yards, a touchdown. Week 13 versus the Rams, 2 catches, 36 yards, and a touchdown. And Week 14 at the Giants, 4 for 51 on 7 targets. So right now he's pretty much operating as the number 1 wide receiver is Valdez-Scantling, even though we know he's not really a true number 1. In the last couple of years with great quarterbacks and Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City, and earlier this season with Josh Allen, he couldn't get anything going. But like I said, he's the number 1 over there. He's playing the majority of the snaps, a good route participation. And this week, if Hayner's in there, quarterback, or Rattler, we'll see who it is for this New Orleans Saint team. I believe they're going to be trailing early and often versus the Commanders, and Valdez-Scantling could work his way, especially in garbage time, to putting up some points. He's an ad this week, and he's available right now in 65% of fantasy leagues. Next receiver, Xavier Legette of the Carolina Panthers. Xavier Legette, he's been a decent wide receiver his rookie year, first-round pick for this Panther team. And him and Bryce Young are starting to work on rapport between these two players, but Legette definitely dropped a big pass at the end of that ball game in last week's loss at the Philadelphia Eagles, because if he came up with it, it would have been a touchdown, and he would have had a nice fantasy day. So the last 3 weeks, Week 12 versus Kansas City, 4 catches, 56 yards. Week 13 versus Tampa Bay, 4 catches, 53 yards. Week 14 in Philadelphia, 2 catches, 39 yards on 8 targets. So the targets are there. Good matchup versus the Cowboys coming up here in Week 15. Gives up the 12th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. I think Xavier Legette, he could go out there, help fantasy owners in deeper leagues, and he's available right now in 72% of fantasy leagues. Next wide receiver, Mario Douglas of the New England Patriots. The Douglas and the Pats coming off bye now, and we'll see if their offense could improve just a little bit coming off bye with a decent matchup at the Cardinals here in Week 15. So the last few games for Douglas, Week 11 versus the Rams, 4 catches, 59 yards. Week 12 in Miami, a carry, 1 yard, 5 catches, 62 yards. And week 13 versus the Colts, 4 catches, 20 yards. So like I said, coming off the bye, maybe this offense could improve just a little bit. And it's a decent matchup in an indoor game at Arizona where they just got torched by the Seattle Seahawks. I believe the Mario Douglas is number 1A, B option. Him and Hunter Henry, the top 2 passing options for this New England Patriot team. And he's available right now in tons of fantasy leagues at 78%. And the final wide receiver, I looked at it off the waiver wire this week's Ray McCloud of the Atlanta Falcons. So McCloud, he's been a decent number 3 receiver all season long for this Atlanta Falcon team, and he's available in 82% of fantasy leagues. So 3 weeks in a row, double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues. Week 11 at Denver, 6 catches, 46 yards. Week 13 versus the Chargers, 4 catches, 95 yards in that game on 6 targets. In Week 14, a big game at Minnesota, 8 catches, 98 yards. I know he had the fumble loss, but a nice 11 targets. In Week 15, a matchup at the Chargers where it's going to be tough to run the football for them, I think, at times, even with Bijan Robinson, one of the best backs, in my opinion, in pro football in the backfield. But Ray McCloud, he's got speed. He's a good yard after catch guy, and him and Kirk Cousins have definitely been locked in over the last few weeks. If you need a wide receiver, I think McCloud's a pretty solid add, and he's out there in 82% of fantasy leagues. That's a few wide receivers I look to get off the wire. Week 15 of the fantasy football season.